All right, good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to another short war summary. Today, we've received some pretty big news about what's going on at the Vilnius Summit, specifically in reference to what's going to happen with Ukraine getting into NATO. And we've gotten some very interesting news about that, so let's go ahead and jump right into our first piece of news. Our first piece here is actually a photo of Zelenskyy getting out himself at the NATO Summit in Vilnius. And we learned yesterday that he would actually be attending this thing in person. So here he is getting out of his car and going to the summit himself. And very good to see that Zelenskyy was able to attend because obviously being there in person is a much bigger deal than simply showing up over Zoom. So that's good to see. And moving on to our next piece of news here, we get into some discussions that were being had by the NATO alliance at this summit. It says here that NATO allies have agreed to simplify the process of Ukraine's entry into the NATO alliance, says Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg. And he also goes on to say that we reiterated that Ukraine will become a member of NATO and agreed to cancel the requirements for an action plan for membership in the alliance, and this will change the path for Ukraine to join NATO. Instead of a two-stage process, it will be a one-stage process. So that is good to hear. That's basically shortening the process, which is good because Ukraine needs to get into NATO as fast as possible, as I said, after the war is over. So the last paragraph here says, according to Stoltenberg, the NATO summit also agreed on the establishment of a Ukraine-NATO Council, as well as a multi-year support program aimed at bringing the Ukrainian armed forces up to NATO standards. And of course, even though Ukraine is fighting really good and really strongly in this war, they have to be brought up to NATO standards. Everything has to be standardized, and that is a long process, very arduous in itself. So it looks like there is now a committee in place to make sure that it happens in a timely fashion. So, very good news in that respect. But, however, we have got some somewhat bad news, and that is in our next article here, which is from FITUX. And specifically, it's about the wording of Ukraine getting into NATO, which has raised some eyebrows with some. And it says here that NATO's final declaration for Ukraine membership pathway says, quote unquote, we will be in a position to extend an invitation to Ukraine to join the alliance when allies agree and conditions are met. And that was reported by Reuters. And this wording here is not what Ukraine wants to hear. And also, I'm a little bit disappointed in it myself because this is extremely vague. This is not saying that they're going to give them a very clear timeline to join. In fact, this is about as vague as it can get without saying no. So not very good at all. And it's basically saying whenever they feel like letting them in, they'll let them in. It's not giving a guaranteed date. It's not giving exact conditions that must be met. It's leaving a lot of pliability in here, which has upset Ukraine a lot. And we're about to get to that next here in the next piece of news. So moving on to our next piece, we have this one, which is from us, which says, breaking, Zelenskyy is reportedly outraged by the vagueness of NATO's admission timeline for Ukraine. And he is very outraged at that. I'm going to go ahead and click on this article here to read off to you exactly what he has said. So here we can see what Zelenskyy's statement was. He says, we value our allies, Zelenskyy tweeted, but Ukraine also deserves respect. And this is a very pointed statement right here, very angry. Believe it or not, this is quite pointed at the NATO alliance itself. He also says it's unprecedented and absurd when a time frame is not set neither for the invitation nor for Ukraine's membership, while at the same time a vague wording about conditions is added even for inviting Ukraine. And this was very pointed. This was a very outrageous statements to make here. While I do understand where he's coming from, there is a risk in making very strongly worded statements like this. He could end up pissing off the alliance, and they don't let them in whatsoever. So we're going to see how NATO responds to that. But I do understand why he is angry, because it is quite vague, and they should have been a little bit more straightforward with it. Now down here, we have seen that someone has already gotten upset about it. It was a senior diplomat from Central Europe. And it says here that the Ukrainian leader's tweet did raise some eyebrows in Vilnius. It says here that I'm critical of many aspects, and particularly of some allies' attitude, but I think this has been not a thoughtful nor a fair approach, and saying that Zelenskyy is going too far. And he definitely has some strongly worded statements for the NATO alliance that Zelenskyy did. So, it can be taken the wrong way by folks, and apparently this individual has taken it the wrong way. Hopefully that sentiment doesn't start compounding up, or otherwise we could be seeing some problems for Ukraine joining whatsoever. But with that being said, that is the last of our news about Zelensky, Ukraine, and NATO. So let's move on to our next piece of news, which is actually a good piece of news. It says France will provide Ukraine with Scalp long-range cruise missiles to help Kiev's forces strike targets deep behind Russian lines, says the French President Emmanuel Macron. And this is also very good news. The Scalp long-range missile is a sort of like a brother to the Storm Shadow that Britain's already provided. So the French version is going to be a much more of a longer range on it than the Storm Shadow. So this will be the longest range missile that has been sent to Ukraine thus far, and it looks like France is leading the way with that. I'm not sure if this was a plan all along to basically placate Ukraine with these missiles in the meantime while they got the bad news at the summit. But nonetheless, they will get the missiles. It's about 50 of them, and of course that'll help them on the battlefield a whole bunch. So glad to see that. And moving on to our next piece of news here, we have a post from the Kyiv Post, which says, during the mutiny, Wagner forces reached the Voronezh 45 nuclear base, and Wagner fighters wanted to capture them to raise the stakes of the rebellion, but they could not open the door to the nuclear storage. And that came from Ukraine's intelligence chief, Budanov. And he said that in an interview with Reuters. Now, I know some folks have been a little bit skeptical of Budanov ever since the nuclear incident, and that's understandable to an extent, but he has no reason to lie about this in specific because this is now a moot issue because it's over. But very interesting, if they did reach the nuclear storage, that could explain why the coup was called off at the last second, because they apparently had reached the nuclear facility, which is big news, and it had been previously reported that they hadn't. So quite interesting. If this turns out to be true, the Wagner coup might have been deeper than we thought and much more serious than we thought. So with that being said, we're moving on to our next piece of news, which is from Null Reports. We have another dead Russian general, and it says here that Russian Telegram channels have confirmed the general's death, and his name was Lieutenant General Oleg Sokov, and he apparently was killed in the Berdyansk region, and he was the deputy commander of the Southern Military District. It was rumored that he was dead, and now it seems confirmed, at least in Telegram channels of the Russians, that this guy has apparently died. So another Russian general bites the dust, and he won't be there to hurt anyone else. So that's good news, and hopefully they won't replace him with somebody worse. And moving on to our next piece of news here, we have a very good piece of news, which says Turkey agreed on Monday to clear the way for Sweden to join NATO, and Jens Stoltenberg announced it from Vilnius. And this is very good news because we saw that Turkey and I believe also Hungary was holding up Sweden joining NATO, and now they both stepped out of the way and will allow Sweden to join without any issues. And also, as we reported yesterday, Turkey actually pulled a master class in negotiation and basically got themselves into the EU, and in the meantime, let Sweden in. So I don't know how they pulled that one off, but pretty good negotiating on Erdogan's part. And in the end, we got what we wanted, which was Sweden getting into the alliance. So very good news on that front. Too bad that they couldn't feel the same way about Ukraine joining after the war, because that would also be positive news. But sadly, for now, it's only Sweden. So with that being said, that is our last piece of news for today. If you liked the video, please press the like button, please subscribe, and also go check out our Twitter page as well and give us a follow over there. That is the fastest way to get news about the Ukraine war, and we post daily on Twitter. So if you would, please also go check out our Patreon. You can support us over there to keep us doing this work. And of course, we run streams every single night at 10 p.m. Eastern, and we cover the war and all the details about it. We run polls, answer your questions, etc. So be sure to join us then as well. And we'll see you tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern, and bye-bye for now.